This time, too, I will be looking at the history of relations between Japan and Korea. What kind of relationship do your country and its neighbor have? Are they on good terms? Usually, I think that while neighboring countries maintain an important relationship, they are not on particularly good terms. The relationship between Japan and Korea is like that. In the previous article, I explained the history up to the Edo period. This time, I will be looking at the history of the two countries since the Meiji Restoration. Japan opened its doors to the West after the Meiji Restoration, and aimed to build a country that could compete with the Western powers by adopting Western technology. At the same time, Joseon was rejecting foreigners and refusing to open its doors to the West, just as Japan had done before the Meiji Restoration. From the perspective of Joseon, Japan, which had surrendered to the might of the West and opened its doors to the outside world, was probably an object of contempt. The new government, which had taken over foreign affairs from the Edo shogunate, wanted to start diplomatic relations with Joseon and was about to hand over a letter of credence. However, in the document, the Japanese emperor was given a higher rank than the king of Joseon, and Joseon refused to accept the letter. Many of the high-ranking officials of the Meiji government were samurai from Choshu, and their teacher was Yoshida Shoin. He was a strong advocate of invading Joseon. His idea was to invade Joseon by force and use it as a foothold for Japan's advance into the world. For this reason, Takeyoshi Kido, a key figure in the Meiji Restoration, was also a proponent of subjugating Joseon by force. Kido was greatly angered when he heard that Joseon had refused to accept Japan's letter of credentials. However, Japan had only just ended its war with the Edo shogunate, and did not have the luxury of going to war with another country. In 1871, Kido, Okubo and others undertook a 2-year tour of the West to help the Meiji government formulate its future policies. For more on this story, please see the video from the past. Then, Takamori Saigo took charge of the government. Saigo wanted to go to Joseon to persuade the Joseon king, who was refusing to establish diplomatic relations with Japan. In other words, this was the policy of conquering Korea. He wanted to go to Joseon to be killed there, because he thought it would be good if a war broke out between Joseon and Japan as a result of his death. Kido, who was on an overseas inspection tour, was keenly aware of the differences in economic and military power between Western countries and Japan. And he felt strongly that Japan could not afford to be at war with Joseon at the moment. Iwakura and Okubo, who were also on overseas inspection tours, agreed with him. They returned home in a hurry to stop Saigo's rampage, and prevented him from going to Joseon. As a result, Saigo resigned his government post and returned to his hometown. However, an incident occurred later that contradicted the government's policy. This was the Guakdo incident. In 1875, the first intergovernmental negotiations between Japan and Joseon took place in Busan. However, as these talks were about to pass without any progress, the Japanese side dispatched a warship to put pressure on Joseon and conducted a survey of the Joseon coast. On September 20th, a Japanese warship was fired on by a battery on an island near Ganghwa Island, and in response, it fired back and destroyed the island's battery. First, the new government asked the Qing dynasty, which was the suzerain of Joseon, to take responsibility for the incident. The Qing dynasty responded by saying that Joseon was a vassal state of the Qing dynasty, but that it was also able to conduct its own foreign and domestic affairs, so it could not be held responsible for the incident. In January 1876, after the incident, Japan sent a special envoy to hold talks with the Joseon side. Boyce Nade, a Frenchman who was the legal advisor to the new government, advised the new government as follows. Never make any concessions to Joseon. Demand that Joseon open its ports and apologize for the bombardment incident. If they refuse, be prepared to go to war. The new government acted on the advice. In January 1876, the new government held discussions on the incident with Joseon. However, in reality, There was a possibility that Qing and Russia would intervene if war broke out with Joseon, so they wanted to avoid war at all costs. For this reason, Japan had already held discussions with Qing officials before holding talks with Joseon, and had gained a sense that Qing would not interfere in the matter with Joseon. What were the circumstances in Joseon at the time? While Japan was undergoing the Meiji Restoration, Joseon was under the autocratic rule of the Daewongun. He refused to open the country to foreign nations and supported the movement to exclude foreigners. He targeted the Yangban, the privileged class, for taxation, and lost their support. Incidentally, the Yangban imposed all of the taxes on the common people, and as a result, they lost the support of the common people. His political rival was Queen Min, who he had chosen as the king's consort. When her husband, King Gojong, began to rule directly, she also became involved in politics and came to hold great power. In 1873, she conspired with the aristocracy to remove the Daewongun from the political stage. Unlike Daewongun, Queen Min was positive about opening the country. Under these circumstances in Joseon, the Ganghwa Island incident occurred, and Joseon did not want war with Japan either. Japan forced Joseon to sign an unequal treaty that had been imposed on Joseon by the United States in the past. This was the Japan-Korea Amity Treaty. Although Joseon showed reluctance, it signed the treaty. The reason why they are called unequal treaties is that Japanese nationals who commit crimes in Joseon cannot be tried under Joseon law. This is known as extraterritoriality. This was because Joseon misunderstood that the treaty was codifying the practice of handing over Japanese nationals who had committed crimes in Joseon to the Japanese consulate during the Edo period. After the treaty was signed, diplomatic relations with Japan were normalized, and as more Japanese people traveled to Joseon, Joseon realized that the treaty had been a mistake. The Ganghwa Island incident weakened the anti-opening forces in Joseon, and the forces that wanted to open the country and bring about change made great strides forward. This incident marked the start of the opening of Joseon. Western countries considered Joseon to be a country under the rule of the Qing dynasty, but after Japan concluded a treaty, the Western countries also wanted to conclude treaties with Joseon. There were three forces in Joseon at the time. The conservative faction, led by the Daewongun, which advocated dependence on Qing and pursued a conservative policy. The reformist faction, led by the young bureaucrat Kim Ok-guyun, which rejected dependence on Qing and looked to Japan for guidance in its quest to become a modern, independent nation, using the Meiji Restoration in Japan as a model. And the faction led by Queen Min, which was less radical than the reformist faction but also sought to become a modern nation while maintaining good relations with Qing. After deposing the Daewongun, Queen Min normalized diplomatic relations with Japan and promoted the modernization of Joseon. She brought in instructors from Japan and established a new, modern military. Because of the creation of this army, the payment of salaries to the old army became delayed. Many military personnel became dissatisfied with the government of Queen Min. In 1882, Daewongun incited them to overthrow the government of Queen Min and begin a campaign to expel the Japanese. The military attacked the Queen's residence and the Japanese legation, and the people joined in. The Queen fled, and the Japanese at the legation were killed. Then, the Daewongun returned to power. Japan and Qing both sent troops to Joseon. Qing detained the Daewongun and took him to Tianjin. Qing reinstated Min as the ruler of the country. Qing dispatched Yuan Shikai, who became the de facto ruler of Joseon. After this uprising, Joseon became more dependent on Qing, and pro-Japanese forces lost influence. Kim Ok-guyun, who visited Japan after this uprising, deepened his friendship with Yukichi Fukuzawa, and set out on the path to modernization, relying on Japan. In this episode, we looked at the movements of Japan and Korea, with a focus on the Ganghwa Island incident. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel and press the like button.